Hello guys, welcome back to the reaction zone. In this lesson, we're going to solve a question on the board using stoichiometry. And the question is as follows. 1 gram of magnesium is burnt in a closed vessel which contains 0.5 grams of oxygen. Question A. Which reactant is left in excess? Question B. Find the mass of the excess reactant. And then we are given the balanced chemical equation for the reaction between magnesium and oxygen. To solve the first part of the question, we need to first of all determine which of the two reactants is the limiting reagent. When we know that, we'll be able to find the reactant that's left in excess. So please join me as we solve this. According to this balanced equation, the mass of magnesium will be 2 times the molar mass of magnesium, which is 24, and this will give us 48 grams. The mass of oxygen here is 32 grams. So from the balanced chemical equation, 48 grams of magnesium requires 32 grams of oxygen. So what we need to find now is the mass of oxygen that 1 gram of magnesium will require. 1 gram, if 1 gram of magnesium requires X gram of oxygen, cross multiply. X times 48 is going to be equal to 1 times 32. X will be equal to 1 times 32 over 48, which will give us 0.6 grams. What this tells us is that 1 gram of magnesium will require 0.6 grams of oxygen to be completely burnt. But according to the question, we are told that 1 gram of magnesium is burnt in a closed vessel which contains 0.5 grams of oxygen. So what we can infer from that is that magnesium is not burnt completely because the mass of oxygen here, which is 0.5 grams, is inadequate to completely burn this quantity of magnesium. So we would say, since 1 gram of magnesium requires 0.6 grams of oxygen and only 0.5 grams of oxygen is present in the vessel, it means that oxygen is the limiting reagent. If oxygen is the limiting reagent, it means that the reactant that will be left in excess will be magnesium. So, to answer the first part of the question, magnesium is the reactant left in excess. And that's the answer to the first part of the question. Now the second part of the question requires us to find the mass of the excess reactant. Already we know that magnesium is the reactant left in excess. But how much of it is unreacted with oxygen? How much of it did not react with oxygen? That is what we want to find now. So, to solve the second part of the question, we are going to find how much of magnesium that 0.5 grams of oxygen will react with. When we determine that, we will subtract it from 1 gram to get the mass of the excess reactant. So, going back to the balanced chemical equation, 32 grams of oxygen requires 48 grams of magnesium. If 0.5 grams of oxygen requires X grams of magnesium, and you cross multiply, that will become X times 32 will be equal to 0.5 times 48. Therefore, X in this case will be 0.5 times 48 over 32, and this will give us 0.75 grams of magnesium. So what this means is that out of this 1 gram of magnesium, 0.5 grams of oxygen will only react with 0.75 grams of magnesium. Therefore, the mass of the excess reactant will be the initial mass of magnesium, which is 1, minus the quantity of magnesium that reacts with 0.5 grams of oxygen, which is 0.75, and this will give us 0.25 grams. So the mass of excess reactant, or the mass of magnesium that do not react with 0.5 grams of oxygen, is 0.25 grams. Thank you for viewing, and see you in the next lesson.